firsthand the tremendous leadership that she is showing in Congress. Every single day, she is always reminding our caucus and Congress to speak up, to stand up, and to fight for the most vulnerable amongst us here in our communities, especially in Queens. And I'm so thankful that she's here with all of us. She's been a champion for all these different folks in our country. She is an amazing strategist, and you'll hear more from her on how we're working on so many issues that are so important for the people of America. Yes. Nova agrees. Nova Kim Vasquez. We are also really excited that our Speaker Pelosi is at the helm of leadership of the 116th Congress, which we know is a more diverse and more female Congress in the history of the United States. Even in the toughest times, Speaker Pelosi reminded us that we can't give up and we have to work hard to make it happen. And in 2018, it did indeed happen. So thank you to so many of you who helped make it happen as well. We wanted to invite the speaker. She's had so many accomplishments, but on an issue and on a bill that has really affected so many people right here in Queens, New York City. Just a few weeks ago, under her leadership, Congress was able to pass a Dream and Promise Act, which will help tens of thousands of Dreamers and TPS recipients right here in Queens and New York City. So we wanted to be here primarily to celebrate, but also to make sure that we are hearing directly from our leadership what we can do and what the best strategy is to push it forward, to pass it in the Senate, and to ultimately get it signed into law. So thank you everyone for being here today. Before we begin, I wanted to acknowledge some of our amazing panelists here today. Many of you know these folks and you know their leadership and their members. Every day they are working in our communities, motivating people and reminding legislators at all levels of government what our top priorities are. We have Steve Choi, Executive Director of New York Immigration Coalition. Kavitra from Adhikar. And Natalia, Co-Director of Organizing at Make the Road, New York. So thank you once again, everyone, for being here. As we begin, I wanted to address one of our first questions to our speaker. And again, Speaker, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us in Queens. We've all been hearing in the last few days, the last few hours, about Friday's news reports of potential ICE raids at several major cities, including New York City, that have caused tremendous panic amongst members of our immigrant communities and families. Several organizations, including Adhikar and NYIC, worked over the weekend to gather resources to help people in the event that these raids occur. Thank you, Speaker Pelosi, in case you didn't see, for issuing a statement and for calling on the president to, and I quote, "Stop this brutal action which will tear families apart and inject terror in our communities." Could you please talk about this issue, Speaker, and maybe elaborate on your statement?
Thank you very much, Congresswoman Meng, and before I respond to that, I want to thank you for your great leadership on behalf of the beautiful diversity of your district and of our country. Thank you as well, Rachel, for the hospitality at Elmhurst and all who made this gathering possible today. It's wonderful to be here with members of the official family of New York. Thank you for your leadership and all that you all are doing. And to be with Steve again, and Petra and Natalia, thank you for all that you are doing to help our newcomers in our country. And again, thank all of you in Queens. It's wonderful to be back in Queens always. For sending Grace Meng to the Congress of the United States.
Yes.
She is representative of her district, of her community. The first and only Asian American to represent New York in the Congress of the United States, a pioneer, a representative of her generation, a young woman with those beautiful boys, little boys, showing moms that they can have a seat at the table, in fact, at the table of the Appropriations Committee, which is a very coveted position in the Congress. She also takes responsibility for holding Congress to a high standard as a member of the Ethics Committee. So for these and other reasons, I want you to know how respected she is in the Congress. I know how proud you all are of her as your representative in the Congress of the United States. Thank you, Grace. As I respond to your question, let us just stipulate to a few things. One is that the constant reinvigoration of America are our newcomers to our country. Ronald Reagan said that. Ronald Reagan said that. He said, the vital force for America's preeminence in the world is that the new generation of newcomers who comes to America. And when America fails to recognize that, America will fail to be preeminent in the world. We cannot close the door. You look up his, this was the last speech he ever made as President of the United States, and it was about the Statue of Liberty. It was about the constant youth and vitality of our country that springs from our neighborhood. Secondly, families belong together.
That's right.
It's a fundamental thing. And I thank all of you for operating on that principle and making sure that immigrants know their rights. In the United States of America, everyone has rights that must be respected. That must be respected. And in this next couple of weeks, it is very important for us to continue to double down on what you have been doing so that when the 2-week period the President mentioned is up, that we'll remove all doubt that you cannot be breaking up families, you cannot be ignoring the rights of immigrants to our country. When I saw that the President was going to have these it was so appalling. It's outside the circle of civilized human behavior, just kicking down doors, splitting up families, and the rest of that, in addition to the injustices that are happening at the border. We have legislation to go forward to address those needs. But in terms of interior enforcement, what's the point? Well, I won't even go into what the motivation might be for that here, because this is not a political event. But I will say that we did call upon the people of faith, the religious groups that have supported the President for one reason or another, to say, if we all believe in the dignity and worth of every person, there's a spark of divinity in every person that must be respected, how can we tolerate this kind of behavior in the United States of America? So when I spoke to the President, I said, look, I'm a mom, I have 5 kids, 9 grandchildren, and your children are scared. You're scaring the children of America, not just in those families, but their neighbors and their communities. You're scaring the children. And I do think that some of the faith-based groups did weigh in with the President. I hope so. And now we have to continue to keep that pressure on to remove all doubt that we, in our country, respect people for their dignity and worth, their spark of divinity, respect them for their rights, being in the United States of America, and recognizing that families belong together. So and that is really kind of what happened. He didn't say what he was going to do, but the President said, I'll let you know. Went into, well, people broke the law. So a violation of status is not a reason for deportation. That's just not so. If you have some case you want to make about somebody who's been accused, and maybe, being accused doesn't mean you're guilty, but nonetheless, if you have some people guilty that you want to make a case against, that has nothing to do with violation of status, because then we're talking about over 10 million people who may be subjected to this treatment, and what we need there is comprehensive immigration reform with a path to citizenship. that is what we must be working on together. And in terms of what he said in his statement, well, we want to revisit or address the asylum and refugee movement, I quote the evangelical community testified to us that the U.S. policy, the voice of the future, is that a beautiful thing? The evangelical community, which are big supporters of the president, they came and they testified to us that the United States Refugee Resettlement Program is the crown jewel of American humanitarianism. So when we talk about, and we'll talk some more about the DREAM Act and TPS and DED, and that's not necessarily the refugee and asylum program, but nonetheless how we welcome people to our country as the constant reinvigoration of America.
Thank you, Speaker. As we talk about ensuring that families stay together, families belong together, we know that our community leaders, advocates have been working on the DREAM Bill, the Promise Act for many, many years, way before I even got to Congress. If I could ask you guys, there are some Republican support for this bill too and this issue. When you're talking to folks who might not immediately be convinced, what are some of the economic benefits? What are some of the talking points that we can all learn and use when we're talking to people and trying to convince them?
So, good morning, and thank you, Congresswoman Meng, for putting this together. And of course, I'm honored to be here with the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi.
Once again, we're together.
Yes.
Honored to be with you.
Nancy, even though you're from California, we still love you here in New York. So.
5 children were born in Manhattan, so.
So on behalf of New York's 4 million immigrants and the NYC's 200 member agencies, we welcome you here to New York. And you have such incredible organizations that have taken time out of their day to be here with you today. And I just want to quickly mention the Minkwon Center for Community Action, Korean Community Services, ADICAR, NICE, African Communities Together. That's just a few of the organizations that are here because they're so excited to be with you. I would just say from our perspective, there's so much work that needs to be done, both on DREAM and Promise and on other issues. We've made a lot of progress recently here locally in New York. We just passed driver's licenses here in New York State last week. We protected immigrants here in New York City, and Councilmember Jerome was critical there. But on the federal level, the DREAM and Promise Act. I was there with you a couple months ago to announce the launch of our Dream to Promise campaign, by which we were going to get every single member of the New York delegation, and I'm proud to say we got all 27 Democratic representatives on board signing on to the legislation, which I think was an incredible accomplishment. We have a lot of room to work on this. I have to say we were a little dismayed at some of the debate that happened internally when some of the amendments came down, where there were some very controversial pieces about gang conduct added to the bill. And being here in New York, we've seen how destructive some of those kinds of allegations can be, particularly in a place like Long Island, where essentially everybody is going to get labeled an MS-13 member, and that causes a real problem, and there's a real polarization that happens as a result. So, Grace, I think your question is absolutely correct. We do need to make the case out there that this is not just a Democratic issue. This is an issue for everybody. There should be Republicans on board. There used to be Republicans on board with the DREAM Act. And we need to be able to make this case that, Speaker Pelosi, you mentioned earlier, this is about the future of America, and this is about the past of America. We need to make the economic case for this particular bill, and I think the economic case it's case closed. We all know what kinds of benefits it's going to do for our economy, how much brain power it's going to add to our economy, but we also need to really make the moral case. And we need to make the moral case both to the folks who are on our side, but also to the Republicans as well, and figure out how to make sure that they are also going to get on board, because this is just a harbinger of a debate we're going to have around comprehensive immigration reform, when that gets on the table as well. So we're proud to be working with you on the Dream and Promise campaign. We threw down on that. We're looking forward to working with Representative Meng on some immigrant integration legislation later this year, and we have our work cut out in front of us.
Great.
I just may say that Republicans across the country support the DREAM Act. It's overwhelming that independents, Republicans across the country, the Dreamers, have had such an impression on our country, and TPS is the only fair thing to do in DED as well. So it's just the Republicans in Congress that we have to get to, but it is, this is something that has broad support across the country.
I think one of the things, my name is Pavitra, I'm with Adhikar. Adhikar is a Nepali-speaking, we work for the Nepali-speaking community. We're a worker center, we work on workers' rights, immigrant rights, healthcare, and language justice. And I think for us, it's been a really important piece that in the highlight for DREAM and TPS, there's been a lot of focus on those with privilege and those that are Rhodes Scholars, and I think that's important. But as a worker center, we know that the backbone of our economy is on a lot of workers. And when we talked about TPS, we really wanted to make it about the workers here in New York City and across the country. So for us, that's domestic workers, caregivers, nail salon workers, taxi drivers, Uber drivers. And without that economy, with a majority of immigrants probably running that economy, it would probably cause chaos, right? If we got rid of all the caregivers around the country, it would cause chaos. We went to Representative King and really pushed him to support the DREAM and Promise Act, talked about TPS, DED. I think he was mostly behind us. He's actually been supportive of Nepal in terms of our TPS renewal campaign, but there were just some pieces that we couldn't push him on, and it really did become an issue of party line in the end. And we couldn't push him past that party line. But we hope as we move on to the Senate and continue to push this forward, that people are willing to cross that party line, because we say, and we work with people all around the country, though we're based in New York City, that we have TPS holders and DED holders in every single district. They are the restaurant workers that serve you food. They are the people that drive you to places. So we have to remember the essential pieces of our economy, which are the workers.
Hi everyone, my name is Natalia. From Make the Road New York. We're a community organization that is in New York. We're here in Jackson Heights and Brooklyn, Staten Island, Westchester, and Long Island. I want to thank you both for having such an important event here, for coming to our district. And I'll just mention a little piece from the DREAM Act and on the DREAM movement. You know, I started actually fighting for this in 2005 and was in Washington when we failed in 2010, and it was a huge hit back then. And for those who may not know what I'm talking about, was the push for the DREAM Act, where we were the closest ever. And you know, since then, I think nothing has gotten our community as excited as HR 6, so I thank you for your leadership on that. And I think it's really important that as we work on this and as we push forward, one thing that we've learned from the DREAM movement is that our parents are essential. And we were not able to come here without the sacrifices of our parents. And so we want to make sure, like our lesson learned through the struggle have been that we make sure that as we push for young people and we push for those who came here when they were younger, that we uplift the struggle and the strength and everything that it takes to figure out how to give your kids the future they deserve. And so when we talk about parents, we need to be talking about how courageous they are and how they are the original dreamers. And we owe basically everything to them. And so we're going to be pushing the Senate. We want this to become a reality. And we also want to make sure that there is no amendments in the Senate that will harm our community more than it will provide a relief.
I want the record to show that we did pass it in the House in 2010.
Yes, that's right.
We were very, very proud of the effort, and members and many of the New Yorkers. Lydia Vasquez was the chair of the Hispanic caucus at the time, and Lucille Olive was her bill at the time, and then it went over to the Senate, couldn't get 60 votes because they have a 60-vote thing. But my view is public opinion will change that this time, because many more people are aware of the dreamers and that we have to get it passed. So thank you for all of your work, Natalia, and that as well. But all, thank you.
And as we piggyback off getting the Senate to take action. We have in the audience some of our most amazing and dedicated community leaders and activists. Speaker Pelosi can't say this, but this is the best district in the country. And so, Speaker, how can the everyday person, how can we sway even more public sentiment? How can we persuade the Senate this time to take action? Do you have any tips or ideas or suggestions?
Well, with all the compliments in the world to your district, as representing San Francisco, I always say when I'm home, the beauty is in the mix. The diversity is what we are all about, and it's a blessing. And I sometimes feel sad for some of our colleagues when I go home and see our beautiful diversity and think, you poor babies, we just go home to the same thing. We go home to the future, the face of America, the future. President Lincoln, I put one Republican president, President Reagan, I'll put another Republican president, Abraham Lincoln. He said, public sentiment is everything. With it, you can accomplish almost anything. Without it, practically nothing. But for the public sentiment to weigh in, people have to know. So we all have to be agents for people knowing, calling other people in other states. Of course, New York is solid with Leader Chuck Schumer. This is a big priority for him, working very hard on it, and Senator Gillibrand as well. But you have to, with your communities, to have this radiate across the country so that people know that the moment is here for the vote and that people are paying attention to it and the value of it all. I mean, TPS, this is something so important to so many communities, whether it's across the world, communities across the world. TPS is very important to people here. We are blessed with people from all over. Well, I have the numbers, well, by reading your numbers, you know in this room how many people are affected. And then the DED, that is really important for many of our friends in the continent of Africa and other places as well. And then, of course, the Dreamers. The Dreamers, we've been fighting this fight a long time, as you mentioned, Natalia. And they have made us all so proud because of their youth and their service to our country, whether they're educating or serving in the military or whatever it is. And it is, again, our workforce, as you mentioned, Aretha. It is so important to our country. So we're not saying do this as a favor to them. Do this, this is worth it to you, every American, to you, for us to have the full benefit of the blessing of these newcomers. Some of them, their families been here a very long time. So again, public sentiment, to beat the drum across America. We must pass this legislation. 2 days ago was the anniversary of President Obama passing DACA, and that was very important. Now we have to pass the Fuller Dream Act to address many more people, as well as TPS and DED. But it's know your power. Know your power in this, whether it's the Nepalese community, but whatever the community is, spread the word across the country so that they call their senators in order for them to know that people know are watching this vote, because again, it's about, excuse me, the greatness of America, in addition to the greatness of the individuals who will be affected by it.
Thank you, Speaker. I wanted to ask Steve, Pavitra, and Natalia. We were super excited to watch HR 6 pass the House. However, there is still obviously legislatively a ways to go. What can we tell our immigrant community? There might be confusion on what their next steps are. Do they continue to renew their status? What should they and what shouldn't they do?
Yeah, so very good question. I'll cover DACA /Dream. I think when it comes to DACA, the first thing that I always tell people is yes, renew it as soon as possible. If you're within 6 months to 8 months, I would still say go and see if you can send in the renewal now. There's actually an announcement that's supposed to come out this week from the Supreme Court around the census, and depending on what the arguments are of that announcement will have implications for DACA and for DACA within the Supreme Court, and whether they see it or not, and whether they will be asking the local judges to rethink their answers based on what comes out of the census. So there's a lot of moving pieces, and DACA, thankfully, thanks to litigation, is still a program in place and has to be renewed every 2 years. So please renew it ASAP. And then, we're going to continue to push, and in the DREAM Act with an HR 6, it's really important because it finally provides a permanent solution. DACA is temporary. Every 2 years you have to apply for it. Finally, with the DREAM Act, folks will actually be able to see a green card, which then, after having a period of time here, will be able to adjust their status to citizens. And that's really important because we want to be able to have our community have a say and vote. And hopefully in the future, be sitting in Congress with all of you. So that's our message.
I'm a member of the unelected dreamer, when first elected.
I want to say for TPS, we are also in the middle of litigation for 6 of the countries. And so I think it's really important that we pay attention both to the legislative prospects, but also what litigation is doing. The deadlines for how far the litigation has moved all the countries are different. For the Nepali community, it's March 24, 2020. But that's a lot of uncertainty to live in for communities, right? A lot of folks own homes, cars, have businesses, and they're trying to figure out, are we going to be able to stay or are we not? Which is why we've gotten people invested in the fight around legislation for permanent residency. Even though Nepal's only had TPS since 2015, a lot of our people have been here for decades. And so we have, one of the wonderful parts of the legislation is it doesn't just cover current TPS holders, where there are about 15,000 Nepali TPS holders. It covers all the people that could have qualified for TPS when TPS was granted. So that would be upwards of almost, we would estimate, 40,000 people across the country that are Nepali that would qualify for status change. So that's important. So we're really trying to keep the momentum up and people invested in the fight. But as you said, with the litigation, it does protect people now. And folks have to realize that when they don't have to renew their TPS right now, they get their work authorization cards. But what's really important is that we're facing a lot of issues of people calling where the DMV is not accepting their EAD, right? So people are facing struggles. People are getting caught still by ICE because it doesn't trickle down to the actual workforce in ICE or the DMV knowing that that people's ability to stay here is extended. And so I think there needs to be a lot of education within New York State, within the DMV, to say, look, these folks have a right to stay here. And people are challenging them on their individual level because they don't understand what's going on. So for us, it's really important to say, look, you have the right to work, you have the right to drive. Thankfully, they don't necessarily need status in New York anymore because of the Green Light campaign to be able to drive. But I think that there's a lot of awareness. Folks can always call Adhikar to ask questions, and we do language accessible work.
And I would say that both Natalia and Pavitra are absolutely right. There is a heroic amount of education, litigation, and legislation that's been done to try to protect immigrants and be able to make sure that immigrants with DACA, with TPS, have some form of protection. But the bigger issue is really something that the speaker mentioned earlier. With public sentiment on our side, there's no limit to what we can accomplish. And as long, and I can say this, I can be political in a way that you might not want to, but as long as there is Donald Trump in the White House, and as long as his party has a majority in the Senate, we're going to continue to see these kinds of attacks and assaults on our immigrant communities, both little and big. Whether we're talking about canceling the ability of H-1B spouses to work, or whether we're talking about large things like immigration reform, or these raids that they were going to do over the weekend. We need to figure out a way to take back our country. We need to figure out a way to emphasize again that immigration for so long has been the lifeblood of this country, and that we need to send a signal to the Stephen Millers and the Steve Bannons of the world that this is our country, and that immigration is good for the United States, and we need to see the kind of immigration reform. We need to be on the offensive instead of always being on the defensive. And so we have about 15 months to be able to figure out how to get that done.
Thank you. I'm so inspired by our panelists as I head to Washington. Thank you for your words and your actions. I just wanted to, before we head into the Q&A section of the program, I just wanted to piggyback off of something that Natalia mentioned about the census. As you know, we are very imminently going to hear the results of the Supreme Court decision in light of the citizenship question. To our speaker, regardless of the outcome of the pending litigation, why is it critical for all of our different communities here in Queens and throughout the country to participate and encourage others around us to be actively counted for the upcoming 2020 census?
Thank you very much for that question, and thank you for all that you all are doing.
Microphone.
Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. I was taking my cue from Natalia. Thank you for all that you all are doing, and I just will say in terms of all of this, just to be fair, this president is a departure from previous Republican presidents. I told you about President Reagan, President George Herbert Walker Bush, President Clinton, President George W. Bush, President Obama, all subscribed to the idea that newcomers to our country make America more American. With their determination, their courage, their optimism, their commitment to making the future better for future generations. This is a departure, but nonetheless a threat. So in terms of the census, this is vitally important. The census is the DNA. The people must sign up. And I know it's discouraging to hear some of the things you hear, that we should be in the court, and as the House of Representatives, the Democrats in the House went and testified in favor of getting rid of the citizenship question because it's not in the Constitution. It doesn't belong in the form to fill out. But the court could go that way. The court is ignoring further information that we can document that it was politically motivated to put that question in there. But we have the Constitution, we have the Congress, we have the court, and the court will see what they do. We have to be prepared for the worst, hope for the best, prepared for the worst. So one of the things that I want to commend, one of many things that I want to commend Congresswoman Meng for is she's on the Appropriations Committee. And right now we're having a fight about the funding for the census. We want more money for the census. There are those on the other side of the aisle who say, oh, most of the people probably sign up online. Oh, really? Well, if they do, but maybe they won't. And it'll probably just take a couple knocks at the door. No, it will take more than a couple knocks at the door. And by the way, it is the organizations that have the confidence of the community who will be doing the outreach on all of this to have give people the confidence that they must sign up. If you don't sign up, you're not counted. If you're not counted, it affects the services, the funds for services, whatever it happens to be, from the public sector for the community. So while we may be unhappy about the question on there, we have to, and hopefully we'll win that case, but again, I'm not confident. I just don't know, and we'll know soon. But don't give them a victory by not signing up because the citizenship. That is what they are trying to do, is to make people not sign up. It will play right into their hands. The Constitution is very clear. 3 years after the establishment of our country, a census would be taken, and every 10 years after that, the enumeration of the people in our country would be taken. That number will determine representation in Congress for different states. But more importantly, into people's personal lives are the resources that would be allocated because of numbers. So if you don't sign up, you're not counted. If you're not counted, the community is underserved. And that is a victory for those who do not really believe in governance or meeting the needs of people. I mean, we have a philosophical division in our country about the role of government and meeting the needs of the people, and how we do a budget that allocates, and Congresswoman Meng has been a champion on this, how we allocate our resources A budget should be a statement of our national values. What's important to us should be what we allocate our resources to. She's an appropriator who better than to make those determinations about our values. And one of the fights that we're having right now is to have more funding for the census so that more resources are available. But please, please, I beseech you, I pray that you people, you will sign up and that you will tell other people we must sign up. Don't give them the victory that this, for political purposes, they put on that ballot. And the court is ignoring the further information that's unfortunate, but let's see what they decide. But thank you, Grace Meng, for your fight that you're making for more funding for the census and all that goes with it in terms of meeting the needs of the American people.
And our last question, I wanted to ask our panelists, what is your organization and partnership and coalition doing to ensure that we are able to have the resources and able to implement the counting of the census?
So first I want to take the opportunity to recognize Congresswoman Meng. There's not often too many times where C-SPAN TV is must-see TV, but it was when Grace Meng put Wilbur Ross on the stand and asked him on record whether he had any conversation with the White House about the census, the citizenship question. And he basically lied to her face and said no, but Congresswoman Meng put him on the spot, made sure he answered the tough questions, so thank you for your leadership on that. Look, we know what the census means for New York State. We know what's at stake. And with apologies to late 90s hip-hop fans, but the census is about money, power, and respect. It's about money. Every single New Yorker who's not counted is worth $4,000 in federal money that's lost. Think about what that means for a place like Elmhurst Hospital. Think about what that means for this district, the schools in this district. And power. When you think about the political power that is apportioned by the census, New York lost 2 congressional seats the last time around because we didn't have a great count. You don't think we could have used those votes when it came to the Dream and Promise Act and more? And we're projected to lose the most congressional seats again this year, bar none, of any state in the country. We cannot allow that to happen. And of course, respect. This citizenship question is a question that was baked up in the minds of Steve Bannon and Chris Kobach just to scare immigrant-rich states like New York from participating. We cannot allow that to happen. So that's why we've worked with an incredible coalition that we founded called New York Counts 2020. We got some great partners in the audience, the YMCA, Partnership of New York City, Association for Better New York, that have joined together because we need to send a message, and that is, we are united, we're going to stand up, we will be counted, all of New York. Whether we're talking about labor, business, community groups, local and state elected officials, we need to be out there in a way that we've never done before. Trump is throwing some obstacles at us. He's trying to throw some barriers to prevent us from getting the money, power, and respect that we deserve. And we need to be able to jump over those barriers. We need to be in concert, united, with a front that New Yorkers are not going to take this, and New Yorkers are going to win this.
I want to add today because we've been fighting really hard. Nepali people have never been counted in the census as Nepali individuals. And so we have really put efforts out there, not just in New York, but around the country to get Nepali on the census. I think one of the things that's really important is that oftentimes when money allocation comes, because you do need money to do the census, that they go to larger organizations and not necessarily the grassroots organizations that have the competency in the community. And we've been fighting for the last 6 months, whether it's in the county level, whether it's in the city level or the state level, to say, look, how do we get the direct allocations to those of us that actually have the competency in the language, but also on the ground and the trust because of the census question to get people to actually fill out the census. And I think if you get budget allocations come too late in the game, it doesn't give us the effort and the needs that is needed to really get people to be counted. And so I would just say it's really important. I know you all are fighting hard for these allegations, but to get that out in the community now, because we need to start working on census on the ground now.
The only thing I'll add is we're part of the group of folks who put forward a lawsuit together with the New York Immigration Coalition Casa de Maryland and Make Their Own New York. So we're hoping that's one of the cases being seen by the Supreme Court that will come through, and they will say that the way that they added the question, which is our argument, was not following procedure, and that will basically save us. But the Census Bureau, this morning I was listening, released a report, and it says that about 9 million families of mixed status are likely not to fill out the census because of the question. There's other groups who say that perhaps the damage is already done, and I am an optimistic sometimes, and so I want to say that we're going to fight really hard to make sure that that damage is not done, that we are creative about how we're helping people fill out the questions, that I think a lot of our community members, especially maybe perhaps either older folks or folks who haven't been or are not too accustomed to like online forms or technology, that we can take the time to help them fill out this, because, you know, to be honest, if a government agent or person that works for the government goes to knock on your door, that may be a scary feeling. But if it's a community organization that you've been working with and that person is helping you out, then the outcome can be different. So we really have to look at this, especially as community organizations, as an education campaign or organizing campaign or whatever, you know, it is that we look at our work and make plans to make sure everybody's filling this out, and for that we're going to need everyone. And the census does not share information with other departments, so whatever people are going to say, it's not going to be shared, for example, with USCIS or with ICE, which is ultimately people's fear. So we really need, for our schools, for our hospitals, for everyone to fill it out. Thank you.
We have to make it a joyous occasion. We're here to be counted. We're here to be counted. And that is the best offense and defense against anything they're putting out there, because they don't want to allocate resources. This gives them the excuse they need. They'd rather give tax breaks to the richest people in the country than invest in the education of our children. And that, understand, I mean, I don't mean to be a fearmonger, but there's a philosophical debate. They don't believe in governance and meeting the needs of people, so let's just shrink that universe, shrink that amount of money, and then give tax breaks at the high end. So this is, I'm sorry. This is thought. I'll probably repeat it, but.
So we have about 12 minutes. We're trying to get through all the questions. Some are similar. You can see it right here. I'm going to consolidate or try. I have a question for our speaker and our panelists. Thank you for your part in stopping the ICE raids planned for yesterday. What advice do you have for the immigrants in Elmhurst and other parts of New York City if there are ICE raids here?
Well, let's hope that that does not happen, because this interior enforcement is a very mean-spirited approach for them to take. If you want to change the law, let's work together to do that. But understand that, and again, I want to commend all of you for the work that you are doing. I would just say this: unless they have a warrant, they have no business coming into your home to search. If it's just well, let me read it, because this is very important for me to say. An ICE deportation warrant is not the same as a search warrant. If that is the only document ICE brings to a home raid, agents do not have the legal right to enter your home. If ICE agents don't have a warrant signed by a judge, a person may refuse to open the door to let them in. An administrative order of removal from ICE or immigration authorities is simply not enough. So know your rights, and you all are doing such a great job to make sure people know their rights. And again, we beyond those particular families, all of us have to embrace them. This is not America. This is not what we do to people. We do not break up families because of a status violation. That's just not right. And again, the fear that we have beyond the fights that we're having at the border where we will pass legislation this week to meet the humanitarian needs at the border. That's very, very important for us to do. And we have to recognize we're in a Republican Senate, a Democratic House, and a Republican President, but we have the minimal interior enforcement, no wall as we go forward. But in terms of interior enforcement, this is, what is, the President said before his rally, I mean, he said it before his rally, he's gonna round up millions of people. Really? He wasn't. So now they're saying it's 2,000. One is too many. One is too many. But I call upon faith-based organizations, community-based organizations, people to just say, this is not America. This is not who we are. And we will not tolerate this disrespect of splitting up families in a way that disrespects the rights that people have in our country, and disrespecting the rights that anybody has in our country. We diminish who we are as a country. So let's just all join together. You talked, Steve, about other initiations of activities when they tried to do something like this before. I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, I do feel like the actions of this administration are just so egregious and so offensive that we need to be able to do two things. One thing we need to do is to make sure we're responsive to the needs of our immigrant communities that are feeling at risk. And so I just want to commend the city. New York City has done a great job in working closely with us, our network of legal service providers. And the one thing that I would say is if you have any questions, talk to a lawyer, an immigration lawyer, talk to community organizations like the ones here, or give the ONA hotline a call. Their number is 1-800-566-7636. I feel like I'm on an infomercial, but this is actually much more important. So 1-800-566-7636, and you can get multilingual help and access to an immigration attorney. But the second thing is, we need to register our outrage at this. Think about this. When we have gone to the streets, when the Trump administration tried to do the Muslim ban, we mobilized thousands of people to go to JFK, and then hundreds of other mobilizations happened across the country, and the Trump administration had to take a step back. And last year, when you think about the family separation crisis, we organized an event where more than 20,000 people marched over the Brooklyn Bridge, together with hundreds of other actions all across the country, and we forced the administration to take a step back. So I think the moment is now upon us again to say immigration is not a political football, to say that you're going to deport millions of immigrants. That's not a talking point for your political campaign. That's outrageous, that's egregious, and we will not stand for it, and so we're going to need to have some concerted action. So thank you, Speaker Pelosi, for bringing that up.
To go to your places of worship, whatever that manifestation may be. If you don't worship, okay. But if you, that's okay with me. But if you do, because they have to hear from people of faith that this is a violation of these people being children of God. They have to hear from those people because those are some of the people who got them elected in the first place. So the more the faith-based community weighs in on this, the more others in the faith-based community will have to weigh in on this.
I want to add, I think that the other piece is people have the right to language interpretation. So if they come to your door and you can't understand, you have the right to ask for language interpretation. But the other piece is that the raids were really scary, and we prepared for them in the weekend. But New York City is a sanctuary city, and what we've also seen is, though police should not be collaborating with ICE, a way in which there are a lot of traps set up by police that then send people over to ICE, right? And so I think there's a lot of examination that needs to happen in terms of the city, in terms of the way that people get caught up in the system, that then send people into the immigration system. Another piece is we work with a lot of service providers in the city, but they're overwhelmed with cases, right? And so we don't know if there's a raid that's gonna happen, if we actually could get a legal service provider, as well as a language interpreter that actually is interpreting well, to be able to support the individuals and the communities that are being raided. And so I think there needs to be a lot more allocation in the city towards legal services for immigrants, and that's a critical part of being prepared for raids.
I'll just add to this that an organized community is the best response that there will be to raids. I call them kidnapping because if somebody leaves their home and they're not coming back and nobody knows where they were at and how they like disappear, it's kind of like a kidnapping. And so the best way is for you to know your neighbors, to have text threads with your neighbors, to the extent that you can, have a community meeting in your own home and invite the neighbors that you know, and trust the people, you know, that you see every day in the mornings. Hopefully you're able to see your neighbors in the mornings and your neighbors at night, and at the very least you can say like, hey, this is weird activity. ICE uses coercion and tactics of force. They will try to get into people's homes. They will try to say that they're looking for someone who maybe lost their wallet and they're giving it back. They'll try to be crafty so that people open their door. Don't open their door. Don't talk to someone that you don't have to. The same thing for a car. Like your car, you're not supposed to be searched unless they have a warrant as well. And so like the best protection is going to be to always stay quiet, to not tell them anything, whether it's about yourself or the neighbor. We've seen in the past where they do collateral arrest. Collateral arrest means that if they're going to look for Jose, but they found Pablo, they pick up Pablo because Pablo wasn't able to say a lot about himself, so they're just like, okay, we'll pick you up instead. And so a lot of the incidents that are that could have been prevented are usually the ones where people, if they would have stuck to their rights, meaning like not opening the door or not saying anything else beyond their name, that they could have been safe, or maybe not picked up, or maybe just not given the information of a neighbor, not knowingly. And also that ICE often shows up at people's house with a vest that says police, unfortunately. And so again, unless you have a warrant, you never have to open your doors to police or ICE or anyone that you don't know.
And I want to say at noon, Hate Free Zone, which is a local coalition in Queens that we work with, we're having an actual press conference to denounce the raid right in Diversity Plaza.
Last question. This is a more practical question. It's two parts. I think it's two parts. I am a dreamer under HR 6. Am I allowed to apply for conditional permanent resident status now? Part 2, under HR 6, TPS holders of which countries would be eligible for permanent resident status? And thank you, Senator Jessica Ramos, for joining us.
I'm happy to take that on first. So HR 6 is not passed and is not law in both this, it's passed in the House, has not passed the Senate, and the President certainly has not signed it yet. So it is not law. So what we're encouraging everybody to do is say, the end is not here. We are really just beginning. And especially for TPS and DED, where we were able to get this issue to the forefront within a year and a half. I think that we have a lot of work to do. We're asking our community members to join us and continue to educate the Senate, especially Senator Schumer, who does have power to move this issue in the Senate. We want to move this bill with less compromises in the Senate if it's possible. And even if we're waiting until after 2021, we have to set the standard now. So again, no, you can't apply for permanent residency, but we're hoping we can get to a place where this becomes law and folks are able to do so. There's going to be a lot of qualifying factors, but at this point, for TPS and DED, as long as you had TPS or DED or qualify for TPS or DED in all 13 countries, including the countries Obama terminated, you would be able to, if this passed into law, qualify for permanent residency.
But I just may say one, I don't want to call it a ray of hope because I don't necessarily have confidence in all of it, but in my conversation with the President the other night, he said, I'm not going after dreamers. I said, well, I understand that, but some people are in mixed family, mixed households, and dreamer could be in the home, a child could be born in the U.S., spouse could be American citizen, somebody in overstayed a visa could be there, and a dreamer could be there. So you're affecting dreamers even if you're not going after the dreamer. So, but I was at least pleased that he recognized that we have this dreamer and that we want it to be signed. Did you talk about the countries for TPS? Was that part of the question? El Salvador, Honduras, Haiti, Nepal, Syria, Nicaragua, Sudan, Somalia, South Sudan, Yemen. Those are the countries. And then the DED are mostly Liberia and teachers. And
That's
then,
right.
of course, dreamers, across the world.
Well, thank you everyone for taking the time out of your busy schedules. Thank you to Speaker Pelosi, to our amazing panelists.
Let me just Grace Meng, and to thank all of you for being here. And remember, our newcomers make America more American. Thank you for your patience.